Thank you for joining the Center for Israel Education's weekly analysis of the Hamas-Israel war with the best analysts from around the world. Today's focus is Israel and Hezbollah. I'm Ken Stein, the president of the Center for Israel Education and an Emory University professor of Middle Eastern history, political science, and Israel studies. Our panelists today are Lieutenant Colonel Sarit Zehavi, retired, founder and president of the Alma Research and Education Center in Israel. Lieutenant Colonel retired Orna Mizrahi, a senior researcher at the Institute for National Security Studies located in Tel Aviv, and Colonel Jacques Neriah, a special Middle East analyst at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs in Jerusalem. Please note that the previous webinars focused on aspects of the war are archived on our website, israeled.org. You can listen to them or you can view them. Join our highly intelligent Israel Zionism content learning community. There are analyses of how Gen Z, for example, exhibits anti-Semitic outlooks, how anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Go to israeled.org, bookmark it, and return as frequently as you wish. Our center's work remains sharply focused on providing content, perspective, and sources about Zionism and modern Israel. There's no other website like this in the United States, and we're not certain there's another one like it in the world. We have almost 3,000 content pages. We undertake learning and teaching without polemics. We do not engage in disinformation. And if you genuinely feel you're benefiting from the use of the website and the webinar like today, please press the donate button. Now more than ever, with the nasty anti-Zionist and anti-Israeli rants pouring out of blogs and protests on campuses, come learn with us, come learn reliable content. The day after Hamas's October 7th terrorist assault that killed 1,200 and dragged more than 240 Israelis and others captive, Hezbollah opened a second front along Israel's northern border with missile fire from Lebanon. More than 60,000 Israelis were evacuated from over 40 northern communities. And there are 300,000 Lebanese who live in villages within a 20-mile distance from the Israeli border. The cross-border launching of missiles, drones, and other attacks have noticeably risen, perhaps linked directly to what's going on in Rafah and the Hamas-Israel war. Israel and Lebanon share a 200-mile border running from the Mediterranean Sea on the west to the Syrian border on the east. There are about 5 million Lebanese in Lebanon, with a very large diaspora community around the world. Major tributaries of the Jordan River that are essential for Israel and Jordanian agriculture flow from Mount Lebanon, making control of the water a frequent contest between Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. The focus today is on the well-being of Israel's northern villages. This tit for tat that we see on the border, is it going to end up in a major confrontation like there was between Israel and Hezbollah in 2006? Jacques, provide us your context for this building tension between Hezbollah and Israel.
Basically, I think the situation that has unfolded on our northern border is the result of a long history of confrontation between us and Hezbollah. And the problem was that Israel has chosen peace instead of confronting Hezbollah. Hezbollah, from its very beginning, saw in Israel an enemy it had to fight and organized as such. And since 2006, constantly built up a huge army with more than 150,000 missiles, an army of 100,000 militants equipped with the best weapons provided by Iran, China, North Korea, and even Russia. And this army is financed totally and trained by Iranian officers pertaining to the Revolutionary Guards. All this is with an ideology of confronting Israel and annihilating the Jewish or the Zionist presence in Israel. This is basically the equation that we have, whereas we have chosen to prefer peace and not confront Hezbollah since 2006. In the last 2 years, Hezbollah just provoked Israel constantly on the border, and Israel just ignored the tension, ignored the acts committed by Hezbollah. In that way, it encouraged Hezbollah to wage attack against Israel and believe that Israel would not respond properly. And the fact is that we are today in a situation where Hezbollah is firing daily huge quantities of weapons against the Israeli targets. It has succeeded. It's the only army, the only Arab party that has succeeded in driving 60,000 Israelis out of their homes, created a sort of security belt for Hezbollah, and destroyed almost 10% of all the houses along the border. This is the situation where we are. And unless there is a diplomatic solution, which I don't see right now, then the confrontation will certainly slide into an all-out war against Hezbollah in the next few months.
Do you think Hezbollah is prepared for an all-out war?
Yes. Not only he's preparing for an all-out war, he just says it plainly. We have eyes and we don't see. We have ears and we prefer not to hear. And I suggest to hear and see what Hezbollah is saying. Hezbollah is saying very simply, if you hit us deep inside Lebanon, we will hit you deep inside Israel. If you just upscale your actions against us, we will do the same. And we have seen on the ground that the only thing that Hezbollah has not used is long-range missiles, precision-guided missiles, and some sophisticated weapons that are to be discovered in later stages of a war. Hezbollah has said it very clearly that they are not afraid of confrontation with Israel. On the contrary, they are ready for that.
Orna, let us have your perspective of the context.
I beg to differ a little bit from what Jacques has said. He's the real expert, but I think differently about Hezbollah's intention. It's right that they are ready. If the war will occur, they are ready. But I think that nowadays they have no interest in having a full-scale war. And they have decided that they are going for this war of attrition. It serves their interests. It serves the Iranian interests. It serves Hamas's interests. And I think that they have some gains with that. And this is why they choose this scenario. Today is 7 months from Hezbollah's attack on the 8th of October, exactly 7 months. And if you look along this period, every day is a battle day. We have attacks every day from both sides. If you look at the modus operandi of Hezbollah, they choose to have a limited war. Of course, it's a war of attrition, but it's limited. It's limited in its scope. There is a trend of escalation, but they would like to keep it limited because they think that they can gain a lot from this limited war, and they don't have the interest to have a full-scale war. We can get there. Anyway, we can get there, as Jacques has said. And I see two main scenarios that can lead us to a full-scale war. One is, as a result of the dynamics of the war, some kind of miscalculation. You can't control everything during a war, and there can be uncontrolled escalation. And this is one scenario. And of course, it's very much connected with what's going on in Gaza. The second scenario is if Israel will initiate some kind of more intensive attack, maybe even full-scale attack. It's on Israel to decide about that. We cannot say that there is no possibility of having a war, but about the interest of both Iran and Hezbollah, I think that they don't want the war nowadays. They want to weaken Israel, to deter Israel, to humiliate Israel, but by this very limited war, they can gain everything without paying the price for that.
Sarit, please, your perspective of the context.
I live 9 kilometers from the border, and I want to take a few minutes to describe my life since October 7th. I don't live in an evacuated community. 43 communities were evacuated 0 to 5 kilometers from the border. Most of them are completely empty. And every day, since October 8th, every day there are attacks against these communities. Hezbollah is not interested in a full-scale war because there is already war. It already gained an achievement. We are afraid to send our kids to school. We don't have enough shelters. We hear the sirens here every day. We wake up at night hearing the blast. Each time I hear the sirens, I check my phones where the sirens are coming from, whether it's from the west or from the east. If it's from both, I know I have to pack and leave because it's maybe another invasion. This is how we live now. We live under the threat not only of anti-tank drones and missiles and rockets that are being launched to the Galilee every day, but under the very existential fear of an invasion, even though I agree with the evaluations that this is not the probable scenario for tomorrow. But once we have seen what happened in the South and the level of surprise that we experienced, we understand that we will never know. There is no way we would be able to evaluate the intentions of our enemies. And as long as our enemy preserve its capabilities to launch these missiles and to invade into Israel, we are at risk. And that's why it doesn't matter whether Hezbollah is interested in a full-scale war or in a war of attrition. The bottom line is that we have 60,000 Israelis that have no solution, that don't know when they will be able to send their kids to school safely. These are regional schools. It means that schools that had students from other communities, like my community, can send their kids to these schools, and they had to look for other schools. It means that businesses that are operating in the evacuated communities lost the workers who were evacuated. And sometimes the workers are driving every day 3 hours each direction from the hotels in Jerusalem. It means that the tourist industry in the north, which is quite an important industry here in the north, is completely dead. Nobody wants to come here and enjoy a vacation in the sounds of war. It means that I'm suffering from headaches because we have the UAVs 24/7. It feels like it's at home, the noise that they create. It means that when I send my little girl to school, she doesn't have a shelter and she received order to go below the desk if she hears the sirens. It means that once I am with my little girl in the car and I hear the sirens, I only have 15 seconds to run for shelter. This is very different from Tel Aviv that have a minute and a half. I never make it on time. So all these questions about what Hezbollah truly wants, I feel they are irrelevant. The bottom line is that Hezbollah put Israel deliberately in an unbearable situation, and we need to find a way to figure out how to solve that. And deliberately, by the way, it's the same methodology that is used in Gaza by Sinwar with the hostages, deliberately taking the time with negotiations and deliberately putting us in a situation of what we call shuffling without any solution and losing areas where Israelis used to live. This is unheard of.
I find it hard to believe that 3 highly intelligent Israelis with whom we're engaging can't provide 1 or 2 or 3 scenarios on how to make it so costly that Hezbollah would have to stop this war of attrition.
You make me laugh.
What is necessary in order to get Hezbollah out of the mode that threatens Sarit and her community members from having to live under this umbrella of fear? What are possible solutions?
I'll try to answer. First of all, my heart goes to Sarit. I have family in the north that have been evacuated, and it's close to me. It's close to almost all Israelis who have any contacts, any relations with what's happening in the north. Basically, what you're asking, Kenneth, is another government, another prime minister who can decide, and a government that has different priorities. The priority is very clear here. The main enemy, the main threat comes from the north. It's Hezbollah with 100,000 militants, with 150,000 missiles, with long-range artillery, with drones, with anti-aerial weapons, who has just dug labyrinths and tunnels all over the place and prepared for Israel all sorts of ambushes that Israel cannot even imagine. This was supposed to be the priority. And instead of this, we are dealing with small militias, and we are not finishing the job in Gaza. So what do you expect? This government has decided that unless we finish the job in Gaza, then we will turn to Lebanon. And then you have the prime minister expressing himself only yesterday, because one of the ministers says that we have to make sure that the inhabitants return to their homes on the 1st of September. And the prime minister said, who says so? And if they stay there for another few months, what will happen? And if this is the case, then there is no confrontation. This government is not interested in waging a war with Hezbollah. It's the same interest with Hezbollah. Hezbollah is not interested in the war. So the attrition war that goes on right now pleases everybody. But we have to remember that what's happening in the Northern Front is the result of the vision of Qasem Soleimani. This is the united front that he thought about. And this is what we are confronting today. 7 fronts: Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, the West Bank, Gaza, and the Houthis. This is a first in Israel history. For the first time in its history, we have to fight in 7 fronts. And right now, the government has chosen to play in Gaza. And this is why Sarit will continue to stay there, and her kids will not be able to go to school. And this will continue and will accompany us for not only a few months, but for several months.
My heart is also with Sarit. I understand what she's saying. It's really a war in the north. It's a war. But there is a difference between an attrition war that is limited to the north to a full-scale war. And the question was about the full-scale war. But if you are looking for solutions, I don't want to get into what Jacques has just said about the criticism about the government. I say there are 3 possibilities of ending and making some closure in the north. First one, if there is a ceasefire in the south, if in Gaza there will be a ceasefire, I suppose that Hezbollah will stop its attacks also, because this is what they are saying all the time. If you ask me, I think that Hezbollah is one of the people that wants very much a hostage deal, because it will bring some kind of a ceasefire that will let him ceasefire also on the north. So this is one scenario. I wouldn't depend on that, because I don't know what is going on the south and when we'll have a hostage deal. But this is one possibility. The second one is, of course, a war. I mentioned it before, an Israeli decision that we are going into war. Now, Jack is right that this government doesn't want most of the parts of this government, but there are parts that wants it. And we knew about the defense minister at the beginning of the war that he was pushing for having a full-scale war on the north, but the decision was to go to the south, and the northern front will be a secondary front, but it's still there. If the government will see that nothing changes and we have to change the reality for the evacuated population and the people that live there on the north, maybe there will be a decision to go to war. And so this is the second possibility. The third one is the one that I'm talking about, and I think that it is quite realistic, although I've been attacked all over, that we can find some kind of combined solution. Now, this war of attrition created a new situation in the north. The Radwan forces, for example, retreat and go back for a few kilometers, and Hezbollah has a lot of damage, and they have also displaced people on their side. A lot of criticism in Lebanon about what Hezbollah is dragging Lebanon into. So I think that there is some motivation also on the other side to have some kind of political solution. So we can try to have some kind of political solution with the help, of course, of the Americans and the French government. Israel can do a lot about it, more redeployment of military forces along the border, security elements for the population in the north and things like that, different than what we had before the 8th of October. And this all together may create a new reality over there, because I think that a war to remove the threat of Hezbollah is going to be a devastating war for both sides. And maybe we have no other choice but go there. But first, we have to look at the other possibilities and try to see if there is another way to solve it.
All these talkings about a ceasefire brings me pains in the stomach, because the ceasefire that is now being discussed with France and United States, as the details are coming out in the media, is a ceasefire that is based on a dead and failed resolution of the United Nations Security Council that ended the previous war, 1701. And the monitoring, or allegedly monitoring force is either UNIFIL or Lebanese army or both, it depends who you ask. Both of them failed in protecting me and the people of the north here, and actually also protecting the Lebanese themselves, while the rockets are hidden inside the villages of South Lebanon. This mechanism completely failed, and what international community is trying to do now is just strengthen the failed forces that are not willing to clash with Hezbollah, to frame it differently. Instead of disarming Hezbollah, they are talking about withdrawal of Hezbollah, while Hezbollah actually live there. So I don't understand. If they live there, how come they can withdrawal from their own villages. And instead of giving us an area which is free of any Hezbollah presence, 25 kilometers, everybody's talking about 8 to 10 kilometers. So I think that eventually this kind of an arrangement will be a fiction that will enable Hezbollah to recover very quickly and to be capable to carry out the next massacre once it is within the interest of Iran, of Hezbollah, whatever, for any reason, whatever they have. And this is totally unacceptable. I think that what the IDF was trying to do, and eventually we see ups and downs in this policy, so I'm not sure it's truly a policy, is trying to create military achievements below the scale of war that will damage the capabilities of Hezbollah until there is a ceasefire. This is a good idea, except it is not performed fully. As far as it is published, we don't see enough achievements. Today, our defense minister said that IDF pushed Hezbollah away from defense. And each time he's saying that, we get anti-tank missiles launched to the communities next to the border. You need the site with most of these missiles. You need to see the target in order to launch these missiles. So something doesn't match here.
I cannot but agree with Sarit. All the solutions that are presented to Israel are illusions in our eyes. They are talking of deploying 15,000 Lebanese soldiers in South Lebanon. From where are they going to draft 15,000 soldiers, Lebanese soldiers in South Lebanon? And then we know that the Lebanese army is built on sectarian brigades. You have a Sunni brigade, a Maronite brigade, or Christian brigade, a Shiite brigade, and each of them is deployed in a territory that belongs to the same community. Can you imagine a moment that 15,000 soldiers, which is almost all the combat units of the Lebanese army, be deployed in the south, in the Shiite areas? This is crazy. In 1982, we let the Christian militias deploy in the Shuf and the Druze mountains. And when we withdrew from there, there was a massacre, not only against those battalions that were there, but against all the Christian community that lived there. And there was a big, huge exile. The Druze drove away all the Christian families that lived there. So this is the kind of solution that you are given. And let us not forget what Hezbollah says. Hezbollah is not talking about 13 points of litigation between us and the border. He's not talking about the border on the blue line. Hezbollah is waving the idea that the border between Israel and Lebanon should be the border of Paulet-Newcomb of 1923. 1923 is a border that is unacceptable to Israel. Unacceptable. It is impossible. And this is what Hezbollah is after. And you believe that he's the only one who says so? No, Mikati, Prime Minister, he says the same thing. This is the position of the government of Lebanon. We should not fall into illusions. We have a problem in front of us and we have to face it. Sometimes in lives of nations, you have to make a decision. And the decision here is to fight back. And if we don't fight back, the photo up after the war, the photo souvenir of Hezbollah will be, we have won the war. And this means that we will meet again in a few years after they organize again and after they just recoup from what they suffered in this war.
You have to look at the alternatives and the situation in Israel nowadays. We have to finish with what is going on in the south. And I don't think that this is the right time to go now all out full-scale war in the north. And I'm not talking about an ultimate solution. I'm talking about some kind of interim solution that will bring us some time for reconstruction and for understanding what was happening from the 7th of October and to try to recover from this awful situation and atrocities. And then we'll have to deal with Hezbollah, and it's not just Hezbollah. You have to bear in mind that Hezbollah is not by himself. Hezbollah is Iran. If we're going to a full-scale war, it's not just going to be the war between Israel and Hezbollah. It's going to be larger, a multi-front war, and we have to bear it in mind and think if this is the scenario that we are looking for today. And I think that today is not the right time for that, and we have to look for interim solution. And let me remind you, Jack, since 2006, we have 70 years of quiet border, silent. Of course, the monster was building itself, but I think that we can gain some more years of quiet border with some kind of the consequences of both the military activities that the IDF is waging now and the military solution, and have some kind of white border again for an interim period, and then we'll go after Hezbollah when the time is right for that. I don't see that now is the right time for such a wide-scale war that is going to be a multi-front war anyway.
I have a colleague of mine who teaches American foreign policy, and he said, is there a message that Israel can send to Hezbollah in the north that would be a parallel or similar to the message that Israel sent in response to April 13 and 14? Is there a message that can be sent that says, we can find you when we want to, and we can make it devastating? Or, as he said to me, is there something that can be done like April 1, which obviously precipitated, or we think precipitated, April 13, 14? In other words, something that's not a major conflict or confrontation, but something that certainly contains deterrence, or raises the question of, do we really want to continue with this, or should we stop it now, even if Gaza and Rafah is not stopped?
Let me remind you that in 2006, we waged a war against Hezbollah because of the abduction of 2 soldiers. And here we are suffering day after day, bombs and missiles and you name it, war day after day. And we are sitting and saying, okay, we will look for interim solutions. Well, are we joking? This is not a joke. A country that behaves has a moral responsibility for its citizens. 60,000 of them have been evicted from their house, and we have to return them at the price of blood that we have to pay. As a policy advisor of Yitzhak Rabin, this is what would I have advised him to do.
You cannot deter a terrorist organization that raises its combatants on the values of martyrdom. It's just impossible. If you want to deter them, the only way to deter them is to make them understand that their plan will not succeed. The plan to eliminate the state of Israel, they are not capable of doing that. They will not be capable of doing that. Their plan to massacre Israelis, to invade to the Galilee, it's a plan, they publish it. The offensive plan of Hezbollah to occupy the Galilee was published again and again and again in the past decade. It is completely similar to the offensive plan of Hamas, to what Hamas had done. We need to show Hezbollah very clearly that it is not capable of executing the plan. Maybe because all Radwan Brigade's assets were eliminated. Maybe because all Radwan Brigade's commanders were eliminated. Maybe because all the headquarters were eliminated. Maybe because we destroyed all the warehouses of the missiles. I don't know, but something needs to be done to eliminate capabilities. I don't think we can eliminate all the capabilities. I think it is very complicated at this point because of the issue of the human shield. But I do think we can do much more than what we are doing now. That's one thing. Second, which is, I think, more important, and this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. We cannot win this alone. We can survive this alone. It's not the same. We will survive. Israel will survive. Everything will be fine. We'll have a ceasefire until the next round, and more Israelis will get killed. But if we want to win against terror and truly defeat terror, we need to work together with the international community. And the international community need to work together with us. That's the key. That's the only key. If you ask me what's the solution, that's the solution. The solution is to work with the international community, joining hands in hands together, not only in defense, as was done that night of April 13, very successfully against the Iranian attack, but also by offense. Because if we will not use offense, eventually offense will be used against us. And when I'm saying us, I don't mean only Israel. Look what is happening in your campuses. Somebody is financing that. Somebody is fueling that in social media. It's not just occasionally.
Or coincidence.
There are Hezbollah flags in your campuses. It's not about Palestine.
How would you want this U.S. government to behave vis-a-vis Hezbollah and Israel in the north? And what would you hope going forward, regardless of who's president in 2025?
I would like Blinken to come and visit the evacuated communities. That's number one.
Instead of going to the Kerem Shalom, let's go to your place.
Let's add another day to the visit. That's one thing. Second, I want to make sure that America is not addicted to negotiation. because our enemy's goal is to have endless negotiations in the nuclear issue, with the hostages issue, and with solving the problem with the North. Sinwar can negotiate forever about the hostages. It doesn't care about the Gazians starving. It's not the issue. We should stop doing that. We should put deadlines together to these negotiations. And it doesn't matter who is the administration.
So they negotiate not to reach a conclusion, just to keep the clock ticking. Is that right?
They
The
don't
clock is ticking to
They don't
elections.
want- They live with negotiations. It is quite clear that the United States is not interested in conflict with Iran. They want better relations with Iran. And Iran has just foiled the attempt of Biden's administration to normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, so-called normalization. When you know that the Saudis have a very severe condition now, accepting the peace plan of 2002, which means two-state solution, this government would not do that. And the Americans have signified again and again to Israel that they are not interested in a regional war. What does this mean? They don't want us to wage a preemptive strike against Hezbollah, and they prevented us. They don't want us to go deep inside Iran, and they have prevented us. There's a cooperation between the army, but there's a limit. There are American interests, a threshold that Israel cannot cross. And this is what we have to discuss with the Americans. It's not the first time that the Americans are castigating Israel by stopping the shipment of weapons to Israel, sophisticated weapons. We have seen that after the bombing of the Osirak reactor in Iraq in 1981. We've seen that in the Lebanese war. The American administration is not so much in love with Israel. They are part of the same democracies, the same values, but they have their own interests. And their own interest right now finds them together with Hamas to stop the war.
I totally respect the separate interests of America. I'm just saying that avoiding the conflict and addicted to negotiations, to endless negotiations, eventually will damage the American interest.
Of course, I agree with both of you about the American policy, but I must point out the fact that the Americans stood beside us from the first moment. And when it came to deal with the Northern Front, you remember the very famous daunt of Biden. And I think that it influenced Hezbollah and Iran in their calculation about what to do and maybe of limiting the war. Of course, this policy of engagement everywhere cannot work everywhere and not against the terror organization. But I have to add two main issues if we are sketching the plan for the American administration. The first one is the long-range interest of the United States and all the Western countries to bring Lebanon, the Lebanese state, to be more stable and to reconstruct the Lebanese state. I see Sarit, and I know that she thinks differently. I think that Lebanon is not yet Hezbollah. It's very weak and dominated by Hezbollah, etc., etc. But I think that still we can do more about trying to stable the Lebanese state, reconstruct the Lebanese state. It must come from the United States and the West, and this is for the long range. And if you do that by at the same time fighting Hezbollah, you can make an alternative to the rule of Hezbollah in Lebanon and not letting the Lebanese state to fall into the hands of Hezbollah in Iran. This is one issue. The second one, and again, I am coming back to the interim solution. The main problem of what is going on now is the fact that the Americans accept the linkage that Hezbollah is doing with the ceasefire in the south. I hear the Americans, high-ranked people that are talking over there, that we have to wait to the ceasefire in the south and then deal with the north. And I think this is a mistake. The Americans should work on breaking this linkage between the two arenas and not serving Hezbollah's interest. Hezbollah's interest is that the war in Gaza will stop, Hamas will survive, and Israel will be weak, deterred, and humiliated. And the Americans should help us to break this linkage that Hezbollah tries to keep between what's going on in the south and the north.
I think that Americans tried to do that. Amos Oct came to Beirut and came to Jerusalem and tried to move forward with negotiations. And the Israeli government was willing, as I've said, to compromise upon many things. But Nasrallah just said very clearly, this is not happening. He refused. There is no pressure.
And I get it as a fact. And this is what I say. They have to do more than what they are doing. Just sending Amos Hochstein is not the only thing they can do. They can pressure more, they can threat and things like that. And I don't see the Americans doing it.
Lebanon is a honey trap. And if you look into Lebanon's history, and you find all the time, all the way along the history, that local commanders of Lebanon relied on outer forces, on foreign forces. Fakhreddin with Muhammad Ali, the Christian community with the French or the English, and so on and so on. Bashir Ismail, 1982, on Israel, for instance. And here you have the parallel. Hezbollah, Iran, the main issue is Iran. You have to take care of Iran and limit Iran's power and hegemony in the Middle East. The Middle East is turning pro-Iranian. At least half of the Middle East is Shiite and it's pro-Iranian. This is the source of trouble. This is the source that just reverberates everything on this area. And this is what we have to concentrate on, the Iranian threat, and try to limit it. If we can do it in several ways, let's do it there. But instead of looking and trying to deal with the local conflict with aspirin, let's get to cancer, a real surgery. This is Iran.
There is no president in Lebanon. There is no government in Lebanon. There is a resolution of the United Nations from 2004, 1559, that talked about the disarming of all militias in Lebanon. It never happened. Hezbollah is entrenched in every system in Lebanon. It is a member of the Lebanese government, the Lebanese parliament. The key ministers in the Lebanese government are Hezbollah ministers, like the minister who control all the entrances and exits of the country, like in Hariri airport. What is Lebanon? I don't understand who are the Lebanese that are against war. These are mostly Christians. I am searching day again for the Shiites that will stand still against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and I can count them in less than 10 fingers. And those who are doing that are threatened to their lives.
We don't have to accept it as a fact. We have to try to do something about that. There are Shiites that are against Hezbollah, Sunni Muslims, and of course Christians, and a lot of criticism about Hezbollah. But you have to choose the opportunity to do something with that and not say it wouldn't work. I don't know. I was born optimistic, maybe naive. If I wouldn't be like that, I wouldn't strive in the Israeli security establishment for 40 years. I try to see the more full part of the cup and to try to find some solutions. I know all of what you are saying. I'm just trying to find some kind of solution.
No, Lebanon is a failed state. Let us recognize it. It is a failed state. Reconstructing Lebanon is like taking a 1,000-piece puzzle, trying to finish it in 5 minutes. It's impossible. Anyone who has put his finger inside Lebanese body has burnt his whole hand, his whole body. This is Lebanon. Lebanon is impossible to govern. Impossible. And even today, when you have no government, you have no prime minister, all transitional. You don't have a president for almost 3 years now. And the country lives. You see that the big joke now in Lebanon, they don't accept old bills of dollars. They want only the fresh ones. And then this is a country where you say they have 5 million. How many refugees are there? Almost 2 million refugees, Syrian refugees. They don't have any basic right in Lebanon, any basic right. Now you're talking about Lebanon, the famous country. There are 75 professions that Palestinians are prohibited in Lebanon. Not physicians, not teachers, nothing in the Lebanese administration. There's a system in Lebanon called kafala. They take the passports of all those foreign workers, those pitiful workers, and they don't give them their passports if they don't pay them at the end of their work $4,000, $5,000. This is Lebanon. What are we talking about? We're talking about a serious country.
We are discussing solutions. I don't think that Israel can save the Lebanese from themselves. I think that's the mission of the Lebanese. And if the Lebanese are not doing that, it is what it is. We have to deal with what we've got. That's it. And I don't see the Lebanese are saving themselves from themselves. I don't see the Lebanese pushing Hezbollah out. I don't see the Christians of Lebanon strong enough to push Hezbollah out. And I'm sorry, I don't hear the voices of the Shiites of Lebanon.
So what is the day after that you are saying, after this big war, full-scale war that we are going to wage in Lebanon? What is going to be the day after in Lebanon? What do you envisage?
I
With
have
a
a
big
vision for Israel, not for Lebanon. My vision is for Israel because, as I've said, we cannot control what will happen to Lebanon. That's out of the discussion, in my point of view. So, if you ask me, first, there is no solution with no price or with no risks. This is clear to us all. I think Israel should try to avoid a full-scale war as much as possible, even though we can get there and we should be prepared for that. At the same time, I think that Israel should try to gain more military achievements than what it is done today. And I think this is possible below a full-scale war because, as you said, there is no interest in a full-scale war of Hezbollah as well. So we should take advantage of that. That's one thing. So that's about the offensive. Second, I already talked about the international community. And third, if we do the first two, it would mean that we can work on an arrangement that will not be a fiction, that will have a deadline, not 17 years without anything, that will have an effective enforcement mechanism, that will not create fake equations to what Israel is doing or things like that. Hezbollah probably won't agree. I agree with Jacques. Hezbollah probably won't agree, but we will win the support of the international community since we have tried and we framed the negotiations in time. And above all, eventually it's in our hands. We need to create the combination of defense and offense. I already talked about the offense. We should build defense to these communities. We don't have shelters. We need defense forces inside the communities. All of this didn't exist in October 7th. And if it did exist, maybe the outcome would be different. So it's an opportunity now to do that in the north, what didn't exist in the south.
I agree basically with Sarit. We should be very careful not to try to be involved once again in shaping Lebanon. We had once an experience and it was a bad experience. It cost us a lot and it cost us regional influence and regional problems afterwards. What we have to do is deal with Hezbollah enough to weaken him in such a way that Lebanon can take care of itself. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to concentrate on a possible scenario in the future, a possible attack from the north on our localities. It was written black on white. It was written in all the programs of Hezbollah. Even the plan of attack, what brigade was supposed to go to Neriah and what other was supposed to be there and there. People considered that as a big joke. And the big joke was on us in Gaza. So basically, we don't have to deal with reshaping Lebanon. We have to concentrate on our interests. And our interest is how to limit the damage of Hezbollah as far as possible, as long as possible, and not to let this monster grow again as we let it since 2006. This is what we did, complacence. We wanted peace. We wanted the Chamberlain thing. I brought peace. No, we don't want peace. If there is a problem with Hezbollah, there's a missile, we have to hit it. We have to make him understand that he cannot rebuild nor consolidate his positions along the border with Israel and live as far as possible from the Israeli border. This is what we have to do. This is what a responsible government should do right now and in the midst of this war.
I agree with both about that, about taking care of Israel's interests as much as we can.
I think the lesson from Gaza and from Lebanon is unilateral withdrawals don't always work. And they don't always end up the way you want them to. So if you're going to engage yourself in unilateral withdrawals, you better know what you're getting in advance and not promises. And if the promises are made, you're going to have to be the one who's going to have to enforce the promises. That seems to be the lesson, the first lesson. And the second lesson is regime change doesn't necessarily work in the Middle East. Sometimes you have local politics that just dominates influences from the outside. And that seems to have been the history of the Middle East in the 20th century and the history of the Middle East, I think, in the first quarter of the 21st century.